O que é doença e cura na perspectiva da energia, luz e informação? Qual a função de estarmos encarnados neste planeta? E como podemos desligar a nossa visão limitada, conectada com espaço e tempo, e ligarmos nossa visão ampliada de percepção de mundo? Estas e outras perguntas serão respondidas pelo Dr. Eric Pearl e Jillian aqui na TV Consciência Próspera. Seja bem-vindo a mais uma edição do programa Consciência Próspera, esse programa de entrevista que completou 12 anos em março de 2022 e atualmente estamos transmitindo entrevistas ao vivo, 9 entrevistas ao vivo por semana. Esta, em especial, está sendo gravada para vocês terem a oportunidade de absorver esses conhecimentos, essas informações legendadas. Inclusive, aqui abaixo na descrição desse vídeo, você tem aí as nossas recomendações e de quem foi que fez, inclusive, a tradução desta entrevista, também conexões para eventos aqui no Brasil, realizado tanto pelo Dr. Eric Pearl quanto pela Jillian. Então vocês vão ter essas informações todas aqui na descrição desse vídeo. Já aproveita que está aqui nesse canal e se inscreva. Se já é inscrito também, curta e compartilhe o link com outras pessoas. E vamos a mais um conteúdo. Inclusive o Dr. Eric Pearl já esteve aqui no programa, se não me engano, em 2018, já há uns 4 anos atrás, ele esteve aqui no programa. Depois que terminar essa entrevista, vocês podem também ver a entrevista anterior. Então vamos lá, já receber aqui os nossos convidados de hoje, Dr. Eric Pearl e Jillian. Bem-vindos. Eu vou fazer uma primeira pergunta aqui para ambos. Qual foi o momento mais significativo, marcante, neste caminho direto para a cura?
I think for me, the most significant moment in this direct path to healing was recognizing that there was no path at all. There were no techniques to be done. There was no time that it required. There were no steps, procedures, no distance, and it did not make a difference whether the facilitator or the client, the person receiving reconnective healing, the experience, believed in it at all. Ultimately, the discovery was that it doesn't care whether or not we believe in it. It simply is.
Which is quite remarkable because in essence, the direct path to healing in and within the reconnective healing experience reveals or allows us to glimpse what we refer to as presence, not space and time, not past and future, but the infinite potential and possibility of here and now, and the divine in a way.
And that there was a glimpse of our shared beingness. It was glimpsed both by the facilitator and the client, or you could think of as the person receiving the healing, although everyone is receiving, the facilitator and the client. And this glimpse gave a certain insight, a knowingness, an awareness that allowed the healing to be recognized, accepted in, and again, it simply sort of took place without time, without anticipation, and the healings in whatever form that they occurred, whether it was the form that the person was intentionally looking for, or whether it was a form that they hadn't even thought about, wasn't dependent upon intention on anyone's level. As a matter of fact, the best thing for the healings to occur was to not try to facilitate a healing, to not intend them. And in that came the surprise of a birthing of something unknown, unthought of, and bigger than what the human cerebral mind could really think of on its own.
You know what this is sparking? So often, Samuel, we hear, I wasn't awake. I wasn't asleep. I was somewhere much more real. And I never tire from hearing that in the variety of ways that that is expressed around this direct path to healing known as the reconnective healing experience. It always causes a sort of a truth to permeate through my being and through the person who is receiving the healing. Again, yeah, I wasn't awake. I wasn't asleep. I was somewhere much more real.
And you'll notice in that, they're explaining it from what it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because there are no real words to explain this. We have words, you know, we've got words that explain or that describe what is here in form. The flowers behind us are here in form. The color of the shirt is here in form. And yet the reconnective healing experience is formless. It communicates with us. So sometimes as we are looking to find the words, describing what it is balanced also with what it isn't communicates so much more. As soon as someone locks the reconnective healing experience into words, it's already, I hate to use this word, but I will, it's already wrong. It's inaccurate because words can only bring you so close. It's like describing the color blue to someone who's never seen blue. You can be exquisite with your words, and yet your words will not get them there to the knowingness of what is blue.
Se descrever.
Muito bem. E nessa sua jornada, como é que vocês se conheceram, Eric e Jillian?
Go ahead.
It was a cosmic collision, let's refer to it as.
Yeah.
No, I was giving a presentation in Miami, and as we often do, we ask for volunteers in the audience to come up to give a demonstration of reconnective healing. And I asked for someone who had a physical limitation, looking for the person who had the strongest one with the most medical documentation. And a gentleman raised one hand because he couldn't raise the other. He was unable to raise it higher than, let's say, parallel to the ground. If he did, it would come out of his shoulder, and it would cause a lot of pain and for a period of time, and would have to be addressed over days. He had been an NCAA athlete and such. And it turned out that he had this problem for quite some time, and he had surgery on it 20 years ago. He had what was called a putty-plas, or putty-plas surgery. And what they did in that surgery, instead of fixing it so that he could have full range of motion, they surgically locked the joint into place so it couldn't move. And he raised his other hand to come up as a volunteer. I let him feel it in his other hand, and his fingers began to involuntarily move, which is what we call registers. And then everyone was waiting to see what would happen once he got on stage. And I said, okay, now before we begin, please remind the audience of how high you can raise that arm. And he said, oh, I can only raise it this much. Go
Now,
ahead.
it was quite, we'll use the word remarkable moment, because if we were to understand this in the scope of space and time, my friend, absolutely in all ways had a limitation that, again, as Eric stated, was surgically placed for no movement beyond a certain point. So it was a bit of an awe-inspiring moment to be the witness. And certainly the witness was 800 of us, including myself. But this was a very good friend of mine. And so it was maybe a little more awe-inspiring at that moment. So we decided to stay for the program that was happening that weekend. I had been at this venue because it also was 2012. And at the time I was very woven with the 13 Indigenous grandmothers who had come to the United States on these 20-year visas, and they were quite involved and instrumental in some of the celebrations happening during December of 2012, this sort of harmonic conversion, if you will. And so to conclude the weekend, my friend and I stayed for the training program. And that was a really magnificent opportunity for Eric and I to sort of glimpse, if you will, something that was quite unimaginable and unknown, that would become our union, our sort of remarkable moment outside of time and space. And there's another little incident that happened that's a little phenomenological.
Phenomenal.
It has a lot of phenomenology to it. You
Yeah.
can tell that. That's okay.
I will, but
It's a moment of recognition.
But I do want to back up. Just, we said you don't have to believe in it. This person definitely did not believe in it. As a matter of fact, I found out later he may have come up just to heckle and make fun of it, but the healing happens anyway. Anyhow, at a later event, Jillian came, and it was another large event, maybe about 600-800 people. I don't know who was there in a large auditorium. Oftentimes what interests people when they're coming to learn or experience reconnective healing in a seminar or a training program is that seemingly phenomenal things take place. And often as the energy builds
In the field.
in the field, or you could, sometimes I notice it because my energy is building, but there's no such thing as my energy because we're all one. So when I'm feeling the energy building, I could deceive myself by saying it's mine or it's me, but it's really everyone's. And as it built, as we were coming to make a key point, all of a sudden there was an explosion. And throughout this whole convention center, one light in the ceiling, one light bulb exploded and fell on the ground at the feet of this woman, Jillian Fleer. And something inside of me said, you are being told to pay attention here. Pay attention to this woman. And I have.
And a decade later, here we are. So it's actually our 10-year anniversary this December.
Coming up December, yeah.
Parabéns aí por esses 10 anos de se conhecerem. E a primeira pergunta que eu fiz lá na abertura do programa foi: o que é doença na perspectiva da energia, luz e informação?
I'm going to give you an important understanding, and then Eric can really qualify this. The perspective of energy, light, and information, the way we understand perspective, would be everything that precedes, that is prior to any experience. So The energy, light, and information is, we might refer to it as God, love, infinite intelligence, all that is, source.
Or that great watermelon in the sky.
It really doesn't require a name. We've given it the name energy, light, and information because that is how it expressed itself through what we refer to as the frequencies, or the frequencies of the reconnective healing experience. But what is really most important, and I love that you've used the word perspective, because energy, light, and information is all perspective. It contains any perspective or all perspective prior or before any known understanding, feeling, emotion, memory. So in a way, its relationship or perspective to disease or healing is pure potential, pure, unknown, in a way unqualified, in that it isn't something that we would name or we would confine to a particular problem or diagnosis. It is the perspective that encompasses all that is, all that is. And so as far as disease and healing are concerned, it in a way is the most direct path to healing in this way.
So, there are so many directions to take this in. And
Such a good question.
I tend to weave, and I'll try not to weave too much, but I will weave a little. Energy, light, and information is the infinite, by whatever name we refer to the infinite, which means it exists before we exist in human form, and it continues to exist afterwards. And it is us, which means that we are infinite. We exist before we have this experience in physical matter, and we continue to exist afterwards. And the infinite can't be added to. The infinite is already whole, complete, and perfect. In our experiences, sometimes we focus in and we reduce.
That would be sensation, perception, thoughts, feelings, emotions. That's the reducing to the body mind, or which could be the felt sense of the body, or to the perception, which is the world, which includes sound, sight, taste, and touch.
So we reduce in what we allow ourselves to, you could say, experience, but also to express in our beingness. So in a reduced expression of who we are infinitely, then we are what is thought of as ill, diseased, any kind of similar wording. What reconnective healing the experience allows you to have is that glimpse of the infinite. And each time we glimpse the infinite, each time we have a reconnective healing experience, what happens is that awareness, that cognizant, that thinking awareness, that realization, that revealing, we tend to carry that more and more into our everyday lives. And each glimpse sets off a series of more glimpses that come along. And with that, what happens is we become the realization, the recognition, the revealing to ourselves of who we are. But the point that I wanted to make here is healing is that return to the infinite. It's a return because we were there before. So it's before the beyond. It's not what's next. It's the return to before the beyond. But again, in healing, It's a return to our original fullness, and in healing itself, you can't technique your way into love. In the beingness that we are, all, as we spoke about, steps and paths and procedures and techniques dissolve. So what's fascinating about reconnective healing is that all the tiny little groupings of energy that are accessed in techniques, as the technique disappears, all of the energy comes back and returns to its original, the before beyond, the fullness of who we are. So it not only reconnects us to our original fullness, it reconnects the entirety of healing that exists because we've taken away the otherness. We've dissolved the separation. And in that becoming infinite healing, the reconnective healing experience is infinite and encompasses all the gifts of all of our techniques, whether we've learned them or not. You can't add to the infinite. Once you can add to something, it's no longer infinite. You can't even have two infinites, because that means that neither of them were ever infinite. So this is not something that we might cerebrally grasp in a moment because I've said it in a few sentences or paragraphs. It's not something that you grasp right away, even from reading it in a book. It's something that absorbs and assimilates and becomes a part of the awareness, not that you have, the awareness that you are,
Yes.
which is much larger.
And in a way, in language, and with all language, there's an accommodation, as Eric is pointing out. But in common parlance, we might suggest that it's a remembering. The energy, light, and information, all that is this infinite intelligence that has no name, unless we choose to give it a name. In its perfection is unobscured. It becomes something that we, somewhere within the body mind, the ego, the personality, have a recognition of. And in a way, it is what, as Eric said, dissolves this seeming appearance of separation. We love to speak about this idea of oneness. We've become so philosophical and spiritual in this conversation of oneness. And in a way, oneness isn't a perspective. Oneness is that precedes all perspective, any perspective. And so that is what we are always exploring, observing, noticing, and experiencing as it relates to the reconnective healing experience. So energy, light, and information would be the key and primary ingredient of all healing and all disease. Revealed.
Right.
Revealed.
So for all the words that we share, all the concepts, it is simply that as we receive, which is our innate design as human beings to receive, as we receive, as we absorb, as we assimilate this, that recognition is a portal, a doorway that opens for us, that allows us to receive the healing. It is both what allows us to receive the healing, and it is the healing itself, which keeps it moving on that infinite path, because then it allows us to receive more healing, and then it becomes more of the healing itself. So when we're running out going, gee, I need a healing, I've got a headache, or I've got an arm that won't move, or a knee that's bothering me, the healing is so much larger than that. It's not that it doesn't include what we're looking for, and it's not that it always includes what we think that we're looking for. There's what we think we're looking for, and there's what we're really looking for, which is why sometimes we say, If you're lucky, you'll get the healing that you're looking for. And if you're truly
Yeah.
fortunate, you'll receive a healing you haven't even dreamed of.
Does that help?
Uma pergunta também que é bem corriqueira aqui no Brasil e eu vou trazer também para a opinião de vocês. Na opinião de vocês, existem trabalhadores da luz e trabalhadores das sombras? E como lidar com as forças contrárias aos propósitos evolutivos?
So I think this is a very important and brilliant question for the sort of the moment that healing, happiness, wholeness is exploring. And this idea that darkness or opposing forces are a part of what we'll refer to as this evolution is a very long labyrinth that I think can be simplified in understanding and in our experience. I'm going to say it this way. Our evolutionary responsibility is to love everyone, but that doesn't mean that we have to like everyone. So our innate nature is love itself. And in that, we do, as one, love. But we may choose not to like everyone for which the journey, the path, the appearance of what we'll call our daily life or past life, whatever you may want to refer to it as. And these kinds of choices or the awareness of, I read something recently I just want to share because I think it may be quite an interesting way to consider this question. So I'm going to read it this way. In a way, it is the nature of our being speaking to the appearance of 8 billion people, right? I will greet this day with love in my heart. And how will I do this? Henceforth, will I look on all things with love and be born again or remember again. I will love the sun, for it warms my bones, yet I will love the rain, for it cleanses my spirit. I will love the light, for it shows me the way, yet I will love the darkness, for it shows me the stars. I will welcome happiness as it enlarges my heart. Yet I will endure sadness, for it opens my soul. I will acknowledge rewards, for they are my due. Yet I will welcome obstacles, for they are my challenge. And when I read this in conjunction with this question about how to deal with darkness or how to deal with opposing forces against the evolutionary process, at the core of this question is just simply to remember we are one. Consciousness is one. One consciousness expressing itself as 8 billion perspectives. So I think the question for our evolutionary process is, what are the questions we ask ourselves in relation to the knowingness that we are one? And that, to me, is really the path, the pathless path to your question. That would be my perspective.
Jillian, you always say everything so beautifully. I don't always. Sometimes I answer a certain way just to get attention, and then I explain it further, just to get someone's attention and explain it further. So if I were to repeat the question, it says, in your opinion, are there workers of light and workers of darkness? And how do you deal with the opposing forces against the evolutionary purpose? No, there are not workers of light and workers of darkness, and you don't have to deal with it because there are no opposing forces. So now that we're all going, oh my God, what is he saying and why? Let me explain. First of all, we know that light exists. We can capture light, we can focus light, we can do lots of things with light. We also know that darkness does not exist. Darkness is an absence of light. As a matter of fact, if you light a candle in a dark room, the flame doesn't get dark. The darker the room, the more the flame grows and glows. So you can't fight against nothing. If there was a war and only one country showed up and there was no country on the other side, there could be no war. Okay? So there aren't workers of light and workers of darkness opposing each other. There is a recognition, a remembrance, an awareness that we are light. When something doesn't seem to be going well, before we go and blame it on forces of evil and darkness, maybe we can realize that it's just us having temporarily forgotten who we are. Maybe we want to challenge ourselves to try something interesting. Next time there seems to be darkness, next time there seems to be a fear. Now, I'm not saying a big fear like, a train is coming, don't step in front of it. No, don't step in front of that train, obviously. But there's a fear of, if I do this, will negative entities attack me or something like that? Let's challenge ourselves to find one fear, just one fear every week. It could be a little one, You might have the belief of, I walked in that front door, I don't want to leave through the back door, I'm going to leave through that same front door, or the knob should click a certain way. Whatever little fears we have, pick one each week and walk through it. Each time we step through one fear, 1,001 tiny little fears we're not even aware of will start to fall away. If we find one fear we can do this, by the end of the year, 52,000 fears would have fallen away, and all they were darkness. What happens when we experience this fears? We need only remind ourselves that we are light and step through it. What's the worst thing that could happen? You'll die. And if you do, you'll be all right anyhow. But if you haven't, you'll have let go of that fear and all those other fears with it. And since light needs nothing to protect itself from, has nothing to protect itself from, then we allow ourselves to be in that recognition. If darkness existed, if evil existed, we could sweep it up, put it in a paper bag, and stick it out with the trash. Everything is really a recognition of who we are, a remembrance of who we are, a revealing of who we are. And in that revealing that we are light, we suddenly get to smile and laugh and say, wasn't that fun or silly? All those absences of light that I tried to run away from or struggle against, instead of simply remembering the essence, the infinite being of who I am. That is the healing. And it's not just that that's a healing in a way that we grasp it, but that is what allows healings to, I'll use the word manifest. It may not be perfect, but to show up in our lives in ways that are physical and mental and emotional and spiritual. That is the willingness to recognize, not that we need to believe in something, just to recognize who and what we are.
Muito bem. E o ego? O que é o ego e qual a função do ego nesse processo de, como citando até a Jillian, né, de reconhecimento de que nós somos um? Qual é a função do ego? O que é o ego?
Well, I would suggest that the role of the ego and the mind is to create doubt and illusion that we are separate and distinct.
Oh, I doubt that.
The
Sorry.
role and the way in which the ego functions in our evolutionary process, I think is really being explored right now quite intimately, both on the level of science and quantum mechanics. I happen to love Donald Hoffman as a way to sort of explore and understand this idea of ego. It's a construct, and in some ways, it is what keeps the evolutionary process, or I refer to it as the appearance of the evolutionary process, vibrant, creative, with a aliveness that is finite, that has a beginning and an end. So in a way, it's our relationship to the ego and its function that I think we are in a revision of. I hope we're in a revision of, because as a construct, it helps our fitness. It informs us about the fitness of the body-mind experience often. I think the tricky part is when the ego, or this illusory construct that isn't found anywhere. We don't look inside the body, mind, and the brain and find something called the ego. It isn't an organ. It isn't present in the system. So in a way, the inquiry, the question of who and what we are becomes vital. As the ego rises, it obscures the true nature of really the only thing we know outside of the body-mind, which is what I am. I. And this is very, very powerful. So it isn't that, in my view, the ego is a problem for what we'll call the evolutionary process. I would say quite the opposite. It's quite necessary for the vibrant expression of consciousness. Again, expressing itself in all these finite forms. But when we forget that it isn't who and what we are, and we become so obscured, I say, it's so interesting. If you had a movie theater, a cinema, just across the street from your home, and the same movie was playing at that cinema for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and that's all that was there, would you continue to go across the street to the cinema to see that particular movie over and over and over and over again, year after year? And I think in a way, that is what happens when the ego obscures the truth of our being. We forget that the ego brings about a finite experience, and it will always have a beginning and an end, but something that is our true nature is ever present. And so we want the toggling. I always say it's a toggling between the truth of our being, who and what we really are, and, as you put in your question, the function, this ego that inspires what we'll call evolution, life, the world. Again, it's a perception. It's a sensation. It isn't who and what we are. So that's a very long answer to that question.
Oh, and so often we think that the ego is here for us to get rid of it,
Yeah.
kill it. It's like imagine that, Mother, Father, God was working over the creation of the human being, and all of a sudden there was this ego and went, oops, oops, now I'm never going to get that thing out of the human being. And of course, it's silly. The ego has a very highly important functional role, as does everything. There is no mistake. So the function, to me, in the evolutionary process is also allowing it to disappear, allowing ourselves to see through it, allowing ourselves to recognize when it is the more self-serving portion of the personality that takes over and says, I want this, it doesn't matter what else anyone else wants, this is what I want, this is what I need. And we start to identify with that ego as who we are, instead of recognizing that it's a part of our personality. Everything is here as a gift. And part of the gift is seeing through that. Just like part of the gift for someone, a sports athlete who runs track has to jump over the hurdles. The hurdles get higher and higher and higher. We don't say the hurdles are a problem, they should be removed. The hurdles are what allow the gift of overcoming a perceived illusion to recognize that it's there for us to grow and evolve from. So, you know, no one is without ego, and my ego rises many times when I prefer it wouldn't, and I'd have to allow myself to think and pause and readjust for it, which sometimes I do better than others. But to say, what is it and what is its function, to even ask the question of the function in the evolutionary process, to even just ask ourselves, that's a huge gift of the ego itself, that we have that to ask the question about, to bring about that introspection. And again, I know Jillian and I have made this point several times already, but a lot of what happens during the reconnective healing experience is what hides us from us. For example, that ego, just like what isn't the truth of who we are, be it a physical or a mental illness or a challenge or something, these things like rust on an old bell, is they sort of vibrate away, they fall out of the picture, and they reveal us to us. It's a gift to have something that we couldn't see revealed, because we see it differently than if it were there all the time from the beginning.
Yeah.
Vou trazer agora uma pergunta que é tanto quanto complexa, né? Qual é a relação entre as formas geométricas, a perspectiva das 4 dimensões e as 12 fitas do DNA neste caminho de cura?
Okay. The question we're considering complex may or may not be. Again, it's that the answer may be more or less hidden, and they're hidden by so many answers that we've already heard. There are infinite books, infinite stories, and I really question anyone who is certain that they have the one answer. On top of which, the more detail that they go into explaining that exact answer and why it's right, the less I'm kind of floating there with them. It's sort of like when someone says, well, I can tell you exactly what reconnective healing and how it works. I'm thinking, well, the only one thing I know for certain is that you don't know that, because if we knew what it was, we would know not to answer it that way. So you can take stories of the Star of David, for example, and there are many symbols that name goes by, and some of them are just escaping me right now. The seals of Solomon, the Jewish star, whatever you want to call it. And people will speak about the triangle pointing up and the triangle pointing down, and it's humanity reaching up to the heavens and the heavens reaching down to humanity. And yet that's a very dualistic response, because it implies positioning. Something is there and we are here, and it doesn't really allow us to recognize the oneness, but it is a wonderful way in geometric form or symbology that allows us to recognize an interaction, whether we're looking at it through triangles, whether we're looking at it through the
Mandalas.
the mandalas, or the Venn
geometry.
diagrams, the circles that are used in the Olympics. There are many things for that. So we can talk about the dimensional perspectives. We can talk about the 12 strands of DNA.
Wait, but
Yes.
before I want to just
Go ahead.
touch on these geometric forms. You know, I think we look at nature that appears in nature that has a complexity to it as we are perceiving it, a mathematical precision that has become, that has allowed us to explore consciousness. It has allowed us to explore the nature of awareness. It has allowed us to explore our relationship between that is unseen, or part of what we'll call the spiritual realm versus the causal body. So in some ways, the geometry of all that is how it appears to us in the world through perception, through thoughts, through sight, sound, taste, and touch. And I think this is a key part of how we are observing. And you use in your question the key word, which is perspective. Again, perspective is sensation and perception all sort of brought into one. And geometry is a very important language to sort of decipher and explore this. You know, if we knew what really was in our computers, the chip that includes substance and incomprehensible mathematical computation, if we had to look at that in order to start our computer, work, have this particular conversation here on StreamYard, look, it just appears. It's already been put into the simplest, if you will, geometric calculation. And so we have to understand that these dimensions are simply a way for us to understand the finite world and the activity of what we are in body, mind in that world. And so I think it's a very important concept. And now we'll go to the second part of your question, which is the perspective and the 12 strands of healing DNA.
Right. And we can see the transitional link in there.
Yes.
For instance, looking at some of the geometric forms, you know, I use the example of a Star of David, you know, inverted triangles. And yet there are 3 sides to a triangle. The star itself would have 6 sides. Some people would look at points differently by adding a central point, but the concept is that if we look at nature, many people focus on nature existing in 3s, 6s, 9s, and 12s. And if you use numerology, you take the 1 and the 2 and a 12 and you're back to a 3 again. Cerebrally, our brains can logic out a decimal system, a system of mathematics, numbers based on tens. But really, if we go back before that, you know, there's 12 inches to a foot, 3 feet to a yard, 12 months to a year. If we want to go to the more spiritual, there were ancient mathematical spiritual systems based on the number 6. There were many cultures, Romans, Greeks, etc., who had 12 gods. When one god would die, it was replaced by another. So whether we're going to math or other concepts or looking at water crystals, there seems to be 3, 6, 9, and 12. And we can find ourselves very caught up in that. And does that mean that there's nothing of value in there? No, it's fascinating to explore that. As far as
the math, I mean, I think as far as the
Right.
mathematics, again, I think I mentioned Donald Hoffman earlier. He's a a very accomplished scientist, and I think quite brave in this moment, because as a scientist, he is really raising questions in the scientific community and in the neuroscience community. And the question that he is raising is simply bringing forth that this geometric mathematical form, which has led to endless calculation. What is the moment in which the universe was created? It has explored the Big Bang Theory. It has explored every conceivable aspect of how the isness of all isness has come to be. And the relevant finding is that there is no theory of everything. There is no end or beginning. And our attention to consistently solve this theory of everything is unfortunately sort of doomed in a way, because space and time is an illusion. And that is mathematically verifiable. That is geometrically verifiable at this time. So we are left with a wonderful opportunity. And I actually think it has quite a bit to do with the healing path. And the opportunity is to bring our attention to the awareness of our present here, now, here, now experience. And within that recognition, knowing that there isn't an end to anything, begin to explore all of the geometry present in present moment. There's tremendous, tremendous discovery still to understand, not the past, not the future, not what was, not what's going to be, but what is the geometric form and dimension and perspective and DNA strand that I think we're starting to sort of see in new humans. These little children coming in have a very different composition. There should be some extensive curiosity.
So in looking at the concept of DNA, and let's look at the concept of knowingness for a moment. We spend a lot of time waiting for science to discover things. And we sort of, a lot of people take the opinion of, if such and such were real, then science would know it. And actually that's a rather foolish opinion, because if science knew everything that was real, then science would have no purpose to continue to exist. It would have nothing to find, because it would have found everything. Oftentimes, without thinking, we confuse absence of proof with proof of absence. And yet, or on top of that, let's say, there is a knowingness. Not that we know because we've heard or been told or read, but that is, we'll use the wording we used before beyond. It's prior to. And so I can only from a personal level go back to when I was asked a question. I'd come out of school, I had studied everything that science had to tell me, and I knew that there were 2 strands of DNA. That was it. That's what I do, period. And I was asked once, while I was in a state's not the exact word, it really was a limitless place or state of awareness, how many strands of DNA I had. Well, I knew the answer was 2. My mouth said, I have 3. There are 12. So it's easy to go, oh, Eric Pearl has 3 and there are 12 and we're moving into it. But the point is, all being one, you can't answer just for yourself. If there are 12 strands and I'm in an absolute knowingness, can I prove it? No, it doesn't matter. Absolutely not. Not to me. Might matter to someone else. Doesn't matter. Then we are all of that. And that's really important. So what's the perspective of the 12 strands of DNA on being on the healing path? We can only guess and look at that. But healing has so many illusions to it. And we're taught these illusions. We're fed these ongoing illusions. We're taught how to supposedly send a healing to someone. To send a healing to someone, it means it comes from one place to another place. And that doesn't allow us to recognize that we are all one. When you learn how to facilitate reconnective healing, for example, you learn to receive, because I can't send. If I send to you, we're in two different places. We're two different beings. If I asked you right now, and you're welcome to try it in your own homes, to stand up and then take a step toward yourself, you couldn't. You wouldn't know which way to go, because you can't move toward yourself, because you already are that. So I can't send anything to myself unless I use a postal service or something. And then I'm still not sending it to me, just to a place where my furniture lives. So what happens is, as a healing facilitator, we learn to overcome the part of the ego that wants to say, look how great I am. I sent a healing to you. And instead we realize we're one. So we receive the healing. And my receiving a healing is Jillian's receiving a healing, is the person that you love receiving a healing, the person that you like receiving a healing, and the people that you can't stand at all, guess what? They receive a healing too. It doesn't separate. It doesn't distinguish that way, because it's the knowingness of one. So if we say, well, I want to learn reconnective healing because I want to find enlightenment. When will I be enlightened? Well, we'll be enlightened when we stop asking when we'll be enlightened, because when we ask the question of when, we're already announcing that it's not now, it's not here, and that's all we ever are, now and here. So is it gorgeous to explore the DNA? Absolutely. Is it beautiful and perfect to be in a knowingness that there's more to the question of DNA than science may have yet discovered? It's beautiful. It gives science something to do and allows us to explore more. Where does it mean on the healing path? Well, goodness ever knows, but you can't become something that you already are. So it doesn't mean it's leading you into enlightenment. You can't become what you already are. You're already enlightened, but it is revealing it and allowing you to see and recognize that.
Yeah.
Sim, muito bem. A Jillian estava comentando sobre essa consciência, e também o Eric citou, né, de trazer para o aqui e agora. E o que é consciência?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is it?
So I really think it is the most knowable, most utterly intimate, and completely impersonal essence and nature of all there is. It is what we are. There is only consciousness. And part of the curiosity and enthusiasm that comes as one explores energy, light, and information is the revealing and the recognition of just that. So consciousness is. It is the isness and the amness of all there is. It precedes all experience, and it is that from which all experience is expressed. So, as Carrick just pointed out, I think it's a beautiful way to explore what is consciousness. Stand up and walk towards yourself. That's consciousness.
And only consciousness is conscious of itself. Only awareness can be aware of itself. We have been taught and raised to understand things from a more dualistic perspective. So again, going back to the first question, what were one of the most significant, remarkable moments in this direct path? Understanding, for example, that we went through school, and unless you were just in school, 2 or 3 years ago, you were told that the matter, the physical matter that we are, emits consciousness, that our brains are the material that allow us to be aware of something. But what we understand today is that we are consciousness. We are awareness. And awareness or consciousness in this moment has focalized itself to physical form so we can touch each other, see each other, hear each other. And yet that is a finite experience of the infinite being that we are. The reconnective healing experience is a finite experience of the infinite beings that we are. Every experience, by virtue of being an experience, is finite because it has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end to it. So how is it that we are infinite? Because our essence is not a state. It's not a place. It's not an experience. It has no edges, no borders, no boundaries, no limitation to it. Mm-hmm. It's only our experience of it that we come in and out of. And yet, every time we dip into an experience, we come out with a greater recognition, revealing of the awareness that we are. Each time we have a reconnective healing experience, we have that glimpse of the infinite being that we are that allows the healing. And each glimpse brings about a series of ongoing glimpses. We still may be bogged down by some of life's stresses. We still might be annoyed at the driver on the highways who cuts us off. We might even shout at them, and then hopefully we'll laugh again and say, now don't I know better than that? But what happens is we'll have these experiences less and less frequently. We'll come out of them more rapidly, more completely, more comprehensively. And this too is part of the healing. We have to be really careful with the concept of what healing is. We think healing means regaining the use of an organ or a function or a leg or something. Healing is not just fixing something. Healing is our ongoing, well, I'll use the word evolution. It may not be the perfect word for it, but it is our ongoing progression. We could say
remembering is an interesting and simple way to explore through a direct approach, a non-dualistic approach. That is consciousness, and so we would definitely say, in a way, that's what leads to the evolution, if you will, of consciousness.
So we're not always remembering as we view it backwards. Mm-hmm. We're often in the recall, and we can't even say forward, of the infinite. I mean, it's if you're open to not having absolute black and white responses, but to truly allowing yourself to explore. This is so intriguing. I know, like, for instance, on Wednesday mornings here, I do an Instagram Live and we share the energy, light, and informational experience, and we just say a few words here and a few words there to allow ourselves to be the exploration, to be who that is. It's different than when we're teaching seminars and training programs and we're showing you how to facilitate reconnective healing. But here it's really an invitation that you accept into experiencing this ongoing infinity.
The consciousness that we are as one. Right. Yeah, for sure. We could go on. And, I just want to touch, because Eric brings up the material, consciousness is a conversation and a debate. It has the materialist model. It's the model of consciousness through matter. And we know that that's obsolete. We know that the materialist model is almost archaic. period in our discovery. So where do we go? Once we sense the truth of our, I'm going to say, our verifiable experience, it requires very little to explore I, because I am, again, isn't dependent upon a materialist model of any kind. It isn't, the body-mind isn't required in any way for all that is, that which is, to know its nature.
There's a little I that's more of the ego and the personality.
Yes.
And then there's the big I of the I am.
That
will
is
take you
conscious.
places. Right.
And that's often in a way, that's the glimpse, as Eric spoke about earlier, but it is also the enthusiastic sort of inquiry that this planet is designed in a way for us to encourage as the experience of matter and form and substance. And I think you used the word localization, this localization. In a way, too, consciousness has to, not as a thing, but obscure its infinite nature in order for there to be a finite experience. So in a way, we're always in a beginning and an end. It's I use the example sometimes, a tsunami that rises out of the water and creates destruction beyond our comprehension in the physical, and then returns to itself, is without any disruption. It is always the same. It contains the same happiness. It contains the same wholeness. It none of that is all that is ever disturbed by any temporary and finite situation. So in a way, I think it leads to our next question, and I'd love us to explore that from this perspective.
Citaram, né, sobre a consciência, e a consciência não é um estado, não é o lugar, e tem também o Eric trouxe também essa perspectiva de estudar, né, de trazer um estudo, e a gente passa por um processo de aprendizado, vai para uma escola, aprende uma língua, vai para uma profissão, e a pergunta é, qual a função de nós estarmos encarnados aqui no planeta?
Without it, who would wear all those clothes? Thatcher.
I am the wrong person for this particular question, because my simple and quite direct response to this question would be, how does that which has never incarnate
Again.
And I can say that in a simpler way. How is it that which only appears as reality is ever separate from or re-establishing its reality? You can't incarnate into something that has never been anything other than an appearance of or a localization of consciousness.
Now, In agreement with that, I can also say that I understand the question as it's being asked. So as something, as that which is never carnate, we are allowing ourselves as awareness to be focal or localized. And in this, if you want to refer to this as being carnate, what is the objective for, I would say, incarnation, not reincarnation necessarily, that's a whole other story, but incarnation on this planet. To me, the experience here on this planet is to learn. It's to learn through the blockages, the obscurations, to learn to experience love in a different way, to recognize oneness, unity, the disappearance of separation or otherness, and to learn that through everything appearing separate and distinct and other and individual, so that we can find and see ourselves again. And also it's often spoken of, which I do give some credence to, which is that it allows the infinite, again, by whatever name we want to call him or her, to experience something in the finite through us, which is one experience you can have as limitless infinite. These are conversations worthy of a cocktail and some time.
You know, with so much planetary turbulence, with the appearance of so much imbalance, it calls, in a way, our imagination. It calls the localization of, I'm going to say, the body-mind experience to the foreground. And in a way, the responsibility, or I'm going to use part of your question, the objective of our expression in body-mind as people of this planet, I think is for us now to create, to build, to design the experience of this planet with the recognition of consciousness as consciousness, not from the perspective of these individual localizations called people. The importance of being a person is a truly important reconsideration, because again, we are not going to evolve, and this planet isn't going to evolve from the perspective of sort of this individual effort, purpose, the exercise of accomplishment, this is a really important one, the exploitation of knowledge. We thought for most of our human history that the exploitation of knowledge was ultimately the incarnation of the planet. In a way, it was progress. It was industrialization. So there's a lot to consider right now in this question, but at its most simple and most basic core perspective, I would say that our recognition that we share our being with everyone and everything is ultimately the knowledge and the wisdom that allows this planet to incarnate, if we're going to use that language, which I'm happy to do so for the purpose of this conversation.
And it also leads into the question of releasing our limited vision,
Yes.
The next question of reality contained in space-time. Okay.
A pergunta agora é como que se desligar dessa visão limitada ou limitadora da nossa realidade, contida no espaço-tempo, e a gente alinhar com uma visão mais ampla, mais expansiva, mais em conexão com a plenitude.
I know there's a lot to answer in that, and I'm going to let Jillian take this. But I just wanted to point out one thing is that it allows us, when we are in incarnation on this planet, to start to recognize distinction between fear and awe, to look at the infinite of spirituality and either reduce it by perspectives, religions of multiple names, shoulds and shouldn'ts and rules, or to be in the limitlessness that spirituality gives us that opportunity. And I think by being here, present, incarnate in this physical, this duality, we are offered that challenge, and it's very fascinating the direction with which we take.
Yeah, I think that the question that you're asking right now, Samuel, is the most charged and probably the most important question in this moment. And I would say that the neuroscience and scientific community and spiritual community all intersecting and in under one potential question, this would be it. So first, I think the language of how we look at this question and explore this question is really very important, because if we are trying to explore the release, if you will, of this highly limited, doomed, really, it is a doomed mathematical paradigm at this point in time. We can't any longer substantiate, qualify existence through the mathematical equation of space and time. It becomes too complex. And part of the exploration around how the release of this paradigm, construct of space of time is going to happen has already begun to happen. And let me see if I can put this in a simple way. There is no vision, as we understand vision through perception or sensation. Let's use perception. There is no vision. There is no way for us to see reality. It isn't possible for the body-mind through the brain to be able to see reality. So we have to start with this. And one of the most wonderful resources, I think Bernardo Castro is a fantastic resource to begin to explore, if you will, that quandary. In other words, reality is not what it seems. The appearance of anything, each other, our loved ones, the planet, nature, it isn't what it seems. It is limited, and you've brought this into the question, it is a limited vision of our reality contained in this illusory construct. I'm even going to say a data set of space and time that is no longer efficient. So I don't think it's about us aligning with an expanded vision in a way. In some ways, it's quite what we've been discussing throughout this past hour. It is a return or a remembering. And this is something we can explore through the truth of our own experience. Again, if you close your eyes for just a moment and you simply explore the nature of I, even just sit with your eyes closed for a moment and explore I am. If I were to ask you, who is the I that is aware of the amness or the isness of I? It would not require any understanding, relationship, or component of what we would call space or time. There are no edges. There is no beginning nor ending to this inquiry. And so part of the expanded vision is really a return. Again, it is a unobscuring of who and what we are as consciousness, expressing itself in this sort of localized experience. Much like, I'm going to use a wonderful example, one of the most revered people for Eric and I along the direct path to healing is Rupert Spira. And we are quite close. He is a dear colleague of ours. And he uses a beautiful example of this idea between a screen, maybe it's this screen, and that emerges out of it and appears on it. And in a way, part of the understanding is for us to be in the recognition that when our attention and awareness has become so obscured or contained in the appearance of that is playing on the screen like a movie, when the movie comes to an end, when this conversation comes to an end and StreamYard returns us to the screen, we will verifiably know there was nothing ever there other than this computer screen, right? So in a way, space and time has limited our experience to the construct of space and time. And we are no longer thriving in that limitation, in that data set, in that mathematical construct. And so I will say in a very encouraging way, and also in a very empathetic way. I believe that already the world, the appearance of our experiences, has already begun to deeply integrate this falling away of space and time. And it may be part of a rise in mental illness. It may be part of a rise in anxiety. It may very well be tied deeply to this idea of the finite. The very expression of finitude or the finite creates anxiety for the ego. It is so. Here in the United States, there was a time in which you could no longer park your car at a car meter because it didn't take coins anymore. It had converted itself to credit card use. And it was very disconcerting. It changed so rapidly, our relationship to our experience. And so this is an important question. It's an important time to explore this.
Right. And when we speak in that question of how to release the limited vision of our reality contained in space-time, part of, we've lived with the concept, the self-designated authority of science as the answer to all things. Science looks at how things work, how nature works. Really, in the reconnective healing experience, the awareness, the cognizance of the awareness that we're given, allows us instead to explore what nature is. It's just a far greater picture and a far expanded level of vision.
I will say that the great challenge of space and time falling away raises the question in our experience, what if there is no such thing as death? What if there is no such thing as birth and death? And I don't need to even begin to explore the variety of different thought paradigms that deconstructs. That alone would be a tsunami conversation.
That alone would be its own interview.
So I think we rest in that earlier understanding, which is the truth of our being, which is simply that we share our being with everything and everyone infinitely.
Nesse caminho, né, de trabalho que vocês desenvolvem, qual a missão da reconexão, do Reconnection, e quais os caminhos atuais para se conhecer a cura reconectiva, aqui nessa perspectiva do que vocês vêm desenvolvendo pelo mundo?
The mission is continuously unfolding. To put it into words is to place it into a box. And therefore, everything in that box we consider as what it is, and everything outside the box is what it isn't. But it doesn't work that way. The reconnective healing experience, the energy, the light, the information dissolves boxes, containers, edges. And so it allows us on one level to recognize what's in a box, but not to discount what's not in the box, instead to allow what's in the box not to be answers, but to be building blocks for asking better answers. So we can say, well, I can see this, but what about this, that, and the other? So as soon as we say this is the mission, it means everything outside of the mission is not the mission. And the mission is continuing to both reveal itself and expand. How that shows itself is in the experience of reconnective healing, the experience of the energy, light, and information. Ways to experience it are both in person and at a distance. Most practitioners, Jillian and I included, facilitate distance reconnective healing sessions as well as in person, which has really been wonderful, in particular over these past couple of years with the advent of COVID and people wanting to maintain, personal space for different reasons. But can you experience it? Can we experience it? Can we share it? Absolutely. Do we need to be sitting in a chair next to you? No, absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think part of the mission for the reconnection is to reveal the recognition of the direct path to healing. And as Eric has just pointed out, there are many ways for one to participate in this conversation. We are so blessed to have Reconnective Healing Catalyst programs, our training, if you want to call them training programs, around the globe, for people to come in person to, when something becomes the truth of our experience, it no longer matters what someone else says. It's a very interesting way in which the ego kind of flies into the flame. I love this example. If you've ever been at a campfire and it's late and maybe it's a humid evening and you see the moths or the insects flying, and it circles the flame and it circles the fire, and at some point it flies into the flame. It becomes that which it is, oneness. And in some ways, this is and has always been part of the exploration and the conversation and the inquiry of energy, light, and information, and the reconnective healing experience. So we would just like to see that continue to unfold in the many ways that it can throughout the world. We're very happy to be coming to Brazil, actually, just in the next month, because it's been a few years, really, with the various limitations around this universal, no country, no planet excluded from this pandemic that we've all experienced. So in a way, we're looking forward to the in-person experience again.
I think we're coming to Sao Paulo at the at Physioquantic.
Mhm.
I think it's that Saturday, the 22nd of October. I believe it will be there.
Yeah, just for a couple of hours. But there is also a wonderful program coming up in Brazil that are really, Malu Nobrega is not just a representative in Brazil, but she is part of our core teaching team that ultimately is responsible for bringing the reconnective healing experience to Brazil. And she has a one experience, that's how we refer to it in Sao Paulo, also coming up November 26th and 27th.
And she's going to share some of that with you directly in Portuguese.
Oh, how perfect. Yes, that would be amazing. Did we answer your question, Samuel?
Sim, respondeu a resposta. Antes ainda da gente ir para a mensagem final, e também vai vir a Malu aqui para falar um pouquinho deste evento, eu gostaria que vocês falassem, porque tem pessoas que não conhecem ainda o trabalho que você desenvolve, também um livro do Eric. Se vocês falassem um pouquinho desse livro aqui, né? O que as pessoas podem encontrar no livro A Reconexão, Cure os Outros, Cure a Si Mesmo, que foi publicado aqui no Brasil pela editora Pensamento. Vou falar um pouquinho sobre esse, antes da gente trazer aqui a Malu para falar dos eventos também que vão acontecer aqui no Brasil.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about that book, and then we'll give you a little bit of a surprise, okay? So the book, The Reconnection, Heal Others, Heal Yourself, was a book that I was asked to write by the publisher. And the basics of that tells about the story of the discovery of reconnective healing, some unusual things that happened to me one night that changed my life and has affected the lives of millions of people around the world. And just as in our training programs, we do teach you how to facilitate healings, not only for yourself, but for others in many different ways, whether you're in person with them, whether you're not. And it's very important because it allows all of technique to do what technique is supposed to do, to dissolve.
Yeah.
So all of healing can then become healed, which means instead of separation and techniques and otherness, all of healing comes together, whether you've learned any techniques or not, because they're dissolving anyway. It's a gorgeous gift that gives you the gifts of everything and allows you to be in receivership in your own healing and receiving not only healings for yourself, but for others. Reconnective healing first showed up. Let's just say that book is approximately 25 years old or so. It's what they call an evergreen. It's an international bestseller in its field throughout the world, and at least in about 40 languages. And we've trained over about 120,000 people around the world, different levels of this work. And if you've got questions, obviously, Malu Nobrega is the person to speak with about that, because she'll let you know who is qualified to facilitate sessions, and she's in charge of the learning of this. There is coming up for us. Well, first of all, there is a second book, which is sort of an offshoot, and it's called Solomon Speaks on Reconnecting Your Life. And it is a way to access a lot of amazing life secrets which appear hidden and yet are not.
It's a book of Psalms for sure, and wisdoms.
Right. However, Jillian and I have a new book that will be released. We're anticipating November 1st as the release date.
In English.
In English first. And it is called The Direct Path to Healing, a Trinity of Energy, Light, and Information. And we know that a lot of the international publishers, as soon as it is released in English, want it in their languages. So we expect that it should be available in
January
Brazil
or February of 2023.
Fairly sure, but if you know the publisher there or the publishers around, and you want to let them know when it's, ask them to let you know when they'll be carrying it, that'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
Muito bem, vamos receber aqui a Malu Nobrega. Malu Nobre está por aqui, tem que abrir aí o microfone.
Olá!
Bem-vinda, Malu.
Maravilhoso, foi lindo ouvir vocês.
E a Malu
Muito
tem
bom.
uns recadinhos aqui também, né, desse evento que eles estarão aqui no Brasil. Deixa eu ver aqui a imagem, cadê a imagem? Deixa eu colocar aqui a imagem na tela para vocês. Vamos ver aqui o arquivo, para vocês verem aqui desse evento que vai ocorrer aqui no Brasil. Vamos colocar aqui para visualizarem. Olha aqui, vamos lá. Está processando aqui. Eu estou aqui em São Paulo. Malu também está em São Paulo, né, Malu?
Não, eu estou em Diamantina, Minas Gerais.
Em Minas, se você estivesse em São Paulo, olha que beleza. Aqui, ó, temos aqui a imagem aqui, ó, do
Isso.
evento.
Nós vamos ter 2 grandes eventos nesse ano no Brasil. Um deles é o congresso, onde Dr. Eric e Jillian vão estar presentes, são os palestrantes principais desse congresso, o Congresso Internacional de Saúde e Terapia Quântica, e eles serão os palestrantes principais. Eu vou estar lá com eles, e vai ser lindo esse evento. E quem tiver interesse em se inscrever, eu tenho um link ainda com o valor do primeiro lote. Então, através do meu site, através das minhas mídias, vocês conseguem ainda se inscrever com o valor do primeiro lote. O Samuel está botando aí nas legendas. E o outro grande evento é o evento anual de aprendizado da Cura Reconectiva, que se chama One Experience. E esse ano nós vamos ter a imersão, o catalisador, nos dias 26 e 27 de novembro. Então, todos vocês que têm interesse de aprender a cura reconectiva, de entrar nessa consciência, acessar esse processo de autocura e também poder facilitar para outras pessoas, esse é o evento. É o mesmo evento que eu fui inserida no trabalho em 2011 e que eu tenho assim muita honra, muito prazer, muita alegria de poder estar levando essa mensagem aqui no Brasil e trazendo vocês para uma experiência, porque nada mais é que uma experiência e não só um aprendizado. E é para todas as pessoas, quem tem interesse de trabalhar nessa área terapêutica, quem não tem interesse, vai fazer lá o seu próprio processo. É um evento lindo e eu espero vocês nesses 2 eventos, com o Dr. Eric e depois na imersão catalisadora em novembro. Muito obrigada, viu, Samuel, por esse lindo trabalho, por essa entrevista maravilhosa que você acabou de fazer. Eu sempre gosto muito da tua visão sobre as coisas, das tuas perguntas e muito grata.
Gratidão, alô, gratidão a todos vocês que também que estão aqui. Vamos colocar na descrição aqui quem é que fez a tradução, a legenda, para a gente ter também essas informações e o conteúdo para quem acompanha em português. E agora a gente vai pedir para eles, né, tanto o Eric quanto a Jillian, eles trazerem para a gente aqui uma mensagem, a mensagem final. Mais uma vez agradeço aqui ao Eric, mais uma vez aqui no nosso programa, também a Jillian pela primeira vez aqui no programa, agradecemos muito e vamos então encerrar com quem? Com a mensagem final de ambos aqui, cada um trazendo um pouco dessa inspiração do encerramento de hoje. Mensagem final.
You know, first of all, Samuel, thank you so much for this interview. Thank you, Malou, for arranging it, and Raquel for your gorgeous translation. I really appreciate that. The answer, the response to that question, Samuel, really hasn't changed for me. You know, sometimes people say, oh, has reconnective healing changed? I said, no, sometimes the way it's expressed or taught continues to expand. I mean, we hopefully want that as part of the purpose of existing here. And yet truth is truth and truth remains the same. So my final message would be, if you're looking for healing, stop looking for that one special healer living in a cave in some part of the remote part of the world. Stand in front of the mirror. There are 2 things there. You will see the focalization or localization of consciousness and awareness that you are. You're looking for that focal matter, material, person. There they are in the mirror. But really, if you allow yourself to see through that, what you're looking for is the infinite, the energy, light, and information that is reconnective healing, infinite being. And that is there for you to see also. It's sort of the difference between looking at the movie on the screen or the screen.
Samuel, thank you. And we're just really grateful to be able to have a conversation and explore these wonderful questions. They were important and vital questions. And, you know, I don't know that any answer is ever really an answer. It is just a continuation of a sharing, a love of friendship in a way, and a trust to be able to explore together these very vital and important inquiries. But when it comes sort of down to what is it that we're all looking for in healing? What is it that each and every sentient human being, animal, plant is really seeking? And I think we would say ultimately it is our shared being. It is happiness. It is love. It is the recognition that we are one. And so I inspire you and encourage you to find the enthusiasm from this conversation in your questions at a training program. Come meet us in Sao Paulo and bring your cares and concerns. We welcome that love of friendship, and we hope this conversation inspires something in you to do so. So thank you for having us.
Listen to the truth of you and bring it with you, because you can't leave it anyway.